Hello, Luke Sciberras.
Hello, Richard. Nice to see you again.
Very good to see you, and great to see you there in your church studio, which we may talk about a little further down the track. But your exhibition is Black and Blue. That's the title. It's at Scott Liversey Galleries in Melbourne. And going straight to that title, I hope that's not any indication of, bad bruising on your part.
No. Well, I guess it does. It refers vaguely, obliquely to the way that I was feeling about the earth at the time. And it felt like, the place was being scorched and flooded and swamped and really tested in many ways, and so were we. And I guess I looked at the general palette and the travelogue that the exhibition holds, and I saw that there was a series of work that is of a place that I'm very fond of, Portsea in Victoria, which is very, very blue and very bright. And then conversely, I was looking at a drought-ravaged landscape and a fire-scorched landscape closer to home, and I realised it was black and blue made sense.
Yes, so the environment around you, and maybe the environment around all of us, has been really, in one way or another, really battered around by both natural forces and human forces. You mentioned a travelogue, and indeed this exhibition is quite a travelogue. It takes you and us, the viewer, to a number of different places from, as you mentioned, Portsea in Victoria. We go to the Kimberley Coast and other locations in West Australia. We go into the centre of Australia, or the more desert regions, and we also go to the Riverland parts. How do you feel about that relationship with different landscapes in so many very different places?
It's interesting because I think I form very different relationships with respective landscapes. It's not like I can say I have a connection to the landscape, because there's almost no such thing. They're so various and so unique from one to the next, that each place that I go to, and generally I revisit and revisit, because not only do I feel as though I get to know a place better with every time I visit, but at the same time, I realize that there's a lot that I didn't know. And so there's a revelation with every one.
Well, let's go to some of the particular works in the exhibition now, because they take us on that series of visits to different places. And Boab Bay, Osborne Islands, West Australia is the title of one work, and there's also Kimberley Coastline, both works from your time in West Australia. As you're in a place like that, as you say, you respond differently to the environment. Can you recall what the forces pulling on you, or what the elements of that environment, those environments, were to make you respond with paint as you have?
Well, with the Kimberley Coast, I was provided with an absolute double whammy, because it has a staggering visual beauty is just so remarkable. And well, it's very famous for its contrast between being rather sort of desert-like, with the escarpments that look almost like the West Macdonnell Ranges, looming over these unbelievable turquoise green and blue waters. And at the same time, I had this fabulous human content invitation to travel and work with the Paspaley Pearling Company, who hosted me there twice as a guest of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So the Art Gallery of New South Wales put me forward to go with a group who were making their contribution to the acquisition fund of the gallery and so on. And my end was to show the Kimberley Coast through my painterly eyes. But at the same time, I had a wonderful glimpse into the Indigenous content there, running up and down the rock art galleries with the Wandjina Woongur people. And so there was this fantastic multi-layered experience, and almost invariably, I should say invariably, that with every landscape I fall for, there's a human content. There's an element of access that I've been given to a landscape, to a place, in a sense of place, which I feel I've been given by many and varying people. And the Kimberley Coast is one of those places that just had every single thing going for it, ticked every box. And I went up there twice over 2 years. The second time I went with Elizabeth Cummings, and it was just one of those revelations.
A wonderful painter to be there with, and of course, as you say, that Indigenous insight into the location and the cultural history as well. Fantastic. Yeah, but I wanted to go back to that comment that you were making about the multi-layered approach when you're in a place like that, and how that translates through to the way in which you physically create the paintings. Because what we see, for example, in a work like Boab Bay, Osborne Islands, are those very big, wonderfully energy-filled brushstrokes and movements of paint. And yet you clearly have quite a specific and very recognizable relationship with the Boab trees, which you know, I'm not saying you paint them in tiny detail, but we can very much see the form of those trees. How do you sort the different approaches that you take with your paint to the landscape?
Well, my paintings to me are about painting as much as they're about anything. They're about the process of falling into a work that is showing me as much as I'm generating and providing. It's a wonderful kind of dance, and the potential that there is, it's like having a very, very well-stocked kitchen. You know, you can cook anything if you've got everything there. And the potential in a painting is absolutely endless, with glazes and watery paint and scrapers. I've got these scrapers here. If I'm allowed to move around them.
Yeah. Just don't move too far away, because we can't hear you then.
So I've got scrapers, like these very heavy, wonderful old things that I use as much for ergonomic reasons, because I have elbow problems, but to remove a lot of paint. But what happens with that is you end up with the residue, the veil of the layers, and when you apply them and take them back, you end up with a very hopefully organic kind of surface that doesn't look too much like it's been rendered with a little brush with your tongue poking out. So there's a wonderful sort of paradox in doing a large work with a lot of energy thrown onto it. Hopefully it acquires its own resonance and patina and so on.
Great to hear about the actual physicality of that process. But as you described that, and it was wonderful to see the tool that you use to do that scraping.
Many, look at them all.
And lots more. Those presumably...
They're everywhere.
Just so that we can see them, because we may have missed them while I was talking. Can you just hold up those tools again for us?
Yes. There's millions and millions of brushes, pots like this that are encrusted with paint. I'll show you my palette. Hang on. Look at this.
That is a landscape of paint.
Yes. So that's everywhere. There are tables and tables covered in things here that allow me to respond to the painting and the subject in the same movement. And that's where I have this wonderful opportunity to revisit the place in my head, you know.
Well, this is the point that I wanted to come to next, which is that all of those things we've just seen, and great to see your studio environment, those are things where you work on and with the painting in the studio once you're away from the location. But you do work a lot en plein air, on location, what is that process like, even though it may not be so much the large finished works, but how important is that process of painting in the location?
I do, when I go traveling, the main point of being there is not only to observe, but to make a response. And that happens simultaneously. There's an extraction, but that is to draw. To draw and observe is to bring something nearer to yourself. The word draw is important, and it's fundamental to my work. It's what I guess it's how I embed my understanding of the place into my work. And it's only ever a gesture or a inflection, however you want to put it. My observation, prayer, there's a lot going on there, but when you're observing nature and slowing down and taking time, I love to spend that time and observing creatures and the movement of water or whatever's around.
Let's go to another specific. Hang on.
Oh, like this kind of thing, where I'll use gouache and watercolor and pastel and that sort of stuff. And I use them when I'm back in the studio to paint from, because you can't remember too much. I mean, you use a lot of memory, of course, but you can't always just make it up.
Well, that's what I'd like to go to, and to go back to a specific work from the exhibition now. Murray River Camp, Mildura, in the Riverland. A lovely dark painting with great big river gums in it. But just take us to that place. What was it like to be in that camp? And did you produce something like the work that you just showed us then, the painted sketch, before the final big work in the exhibition?
Yes, I did small gouaches because I was on my way to Melbourne for some other show, to see an exhibition somewhere. Anyway, and I stopped at Mildura and made a little camp there. Wow, they're fantastic. The Murray and the Darling are so connected, but they're at once so different, and they have a real pulse of their own. And Mildura has a kind of sweep and a grandeur, I guess, that the Darling seems steeper and more sort of warps it, and it's like snakes its way through the outback in a very different way. So I just enjoyed going to Mildura and observing that kind of the difference in the landscape there.
It was fascinating then observing literally the physical relationship that your body has in its memory of the landscape. When you think of the landscape moving, your body moves in response. There seems quite a bond. When we go, for example, a little more into the inland, and there's another work, Mallee and Clay, from Wilcannia. Again, how do you respond to that sort of much harsher, tougher country?
Very, and in every sense, but at the same time, it's a kind of statement, really, because so many people say, why do you go out to, like, Wilcannia is people think of it as the cliche or textbook definition of a place where there's nothing. But in fact, you stop the car or go for a walk and find yourself looking at something that might be unremarkable if you were zooming through it at speed. But the way the trees grow there, and they find their way through the earth, and sometimes where there has been a flood at the edge of the river, where the black clay, as they call it, which is a kind of beautiful beigey grey, which is in that painting, meets the sandhills, and then the sandhills become pink. But that's where that floodline edge would have been. There was wonderful deposits of mulch and seeds and all the makings for a little forest when the water retreats. And you think, how on earth it's a kind of incongruous sometimes to see little forests in the edge of the outback and just beyond the river. And you realize the implications are the river has come up there and not only engulfed that part of the landscape, but left on the edges all of that wonderful sort of detritus, all of that waterline thing. But it was would have been a long, long time ago, because nothing grows in a hurry out there. So those curly mallees are very, very old often. And the only sorts of shade, you know, you often see a little kangaroo or something.
And all of that history which you described of the detritus and the forest to come is all captured in that work, Mallee and Clay. Right at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the title of the show, Black and Blue, and the fact that you felt, as many of us do, that the Earth has been really knocked around, particularly recently in terms of climate change and fires and various other forces. A work, Rising Heat, Bilpin, was that a response to the recent bushfire crisis?
Yes, but the paintings I've been working on from and after the fires are, I can't help but make paintings that are about energy and hope and the force of nature, the way I feel about nature anyway, not a picture of it. But I stopped in many places throughout the bushfire, the burnt regions, and I was invited to go along the Bells line of road toward Bilpin, and which is very close to here. And I felt, you know, some of those stumps were still smouldering, but they were among these ashes that were so white and pretty and speckled, and when it's just still powder lying on top of the bush floor, they leave trails, white sort of trails of where a tree may have fallen and then just slowly kind of desiccated into the charred ground. And then there's the atmosphere and the sun coming through and all of that sort of thing. There's there's a delicacy sometimes in that bush that isn't always about the harrowing experience that we find it, although of course it is. I've always found the bush after fires incredibly revealing. You know, you see the bare bones of the landscape and the lie of the land.
Let's go, as we wrap up, to, in fact, paintings that you referred to right at the beginning of our discussion, which were the ones to do with Portsea, you know, a place that's much more of a human-based environment a lot of the time. There are a series of works in this exhibition to do with jetties, to do with beachball, to do with a boat shed. Isn't that a little out of kilter with what perhaps people associate with your paint practice normally?
Well, they shouldn't expect anything. But no, it's true. There's a whimsy, I guess, in a lot of these paintings. Portsea, to me, is a place of playfulness and wonderful memories and great friends. And I have a family of friends down there, the Barretts, and one of my dearest friends, Mandy. Hello, Mandy. She'll be watching. Her entire family, her brother has a place down there, but it goes way back through the generations, where there was this extraordinary property on the top of the cliff which held a lot of that terrain, which even Arthur Streeton went and painted, and he made a painting that's it's called Barrett's Headland. But there's this fantastic history of art that runs through it. It's not just a total sort of indulgence or a folly. It's there's a lot going on there for me. There are 6 paintings that I did of this in this suite, and I actually started them, all of them, in a way, in a sort of shambolic way, but on the same day that the friend of mine who has the house down there passed away. So there's a tint of nostalgia, I guess, and a salute to him in them. And
well, good to hear about that sense of provenance and tribute that is inherent in those paintings, although not explicitly so. But also good to hear about all of the works in this exhibition. So, Luke Sciberras, thank you for sharing your exhibition with us.
Thanks, Richard. Lovely to see you sort of in person.